She gave a starving old man a free meal and got fired for it. But what her boss didn't know, that old man was a war hero, and 4 Marines were about to make the cafe regret everything.
"You're fired." The words cut through the hum of chatter and clinking coffee cups like a gunshot in a silent room. Every head in the small-town cafe turned toward the front counter. Emily froze. The notepad slipped from her hand, landing with a soft thud against the polished floor. Her face, usually calm and composed behind tired eyes, was flushed with confusion and hurt. She had only done what her heart told her was right. Just minutes earlier, a frail elderly man had walked in, slowly, cautiously, like someone used to being ignored. His clothes were ragged and faded, but the army jacket he wore still held its shape. Its patches and medals, though dull from time, told a story no one had asked to hear. He had taken a seat in the far corner, away from the morning rush. When Emily approached, he hadn't looked up. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Just a glass of water, please." But Emily had seen the way his hands trembled. She saw the way his eyes lingered on a family enjoying pancakes nearby. The hunger wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Loneliness, pride, pain. Without thinking, she brought him a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and hot coffee. She paid for it herself, a small act of kindness from someone who didn't have much to give. She even smiled as she set it down. "No charge today, sir. Thank you for your service." The old man looked up, startled, and then his eyes welled up. He tried to protest, but she gently placed her hand on his shoulder and walked away before he could. She didn't do it to impress anyone. She didn't post it on social media. She didn't even tell anyone. But the manager saw a stocky man with a clipboard and a heart that seemed to beat only for the numbers on his sales sheet. He marched over, face red and furious. "This isn't a charity," he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not here to feed freeloaders." Emily turned, stunned. "I paid for it myself." "I don't care," he snapped. "You broke the rules. We don't serve people like that. You're done here." The cafe went silent. The old veteran lowered his head in shame. Emily stood motionless for a moment, blinking back tears. Then, slowly, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She just left, with her dignity, but without her job. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain started to fall. She walked home in silence, soaked not just by water, but by the crushing weight of being punished for doing the right thing. What Emily didn't know was that someone had been watching, and what was about to happen next would change her life forever.
The veteran's secret, that old man Emily had helped, his name was Walter Grant, though few remembered it now. Years ago, he was the kind of man people saluted. A decorated war veteran, Walter had served 2 tours overseas in some of the harshest battlefields imaginable. He had seen things most people couldn't begin to comprehend. Not in movies, not in nightmares. He had been awarded the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat. He'd lost fellow soldiers, brothers in arms, right before his eyes. He had survived firefights, landmines, and sleepless nights under burning skies. But back home, he hadn't survived the silence. After his return, Walter's life slowly unraveled. The war had ended, but the battle within him had just begun. His wife, unable to understand the distant man he'd become, eventually left. His children, grown and distant, moved away and stopped calling. His body, worn by years of hardship, gave out on him. And the government benefits he'd once relied on barely covered medicine, let alone rent. Eventually, Walter lost his home. Now he lived out of his beat-up, rusted Dodge parked near the city outskirts. He washed up in gas station bathrooms and ate only when he could, if he could. To the world, he was invisible, but not to Emily, and not to Corporal Thomas Briggs. Sitting near the window of the cafe, Thomas had been quietly watching the scene unfold. A tall, sharp-eyed young man with the discipline of a soldier, but the heart of a protector. He wore no uniform, just a plain gray hoodie and jeans. But there was something in his posture, something in the way he carried himself. He hadn't missed a moment. Not the hesitant request for water, not Emily's gentle kindness. not the shame on Walter's face, and definitely not the outburst from the manager. He had seen enough, and he had pressed record on his phone the moment things started going wrong. But it wasn't just about going viral. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. Thomas recognized the jacket, the insignia, the medals. The man sitting in the corner wasn't just some homeless stranger. He was a soldier, a hero, someone who had once stood where Thomas now stood. And Emily? She had done what most wouldn't. She saw the man, not just the clothes, not just the poverty. So, when a manager fired her, loudly, publicly, heartlessly, Thomas didn't speak. Not yet. He simply stood up, left cash on the table for his untouched coffee, and walked out with a mission in his mind. He stood just outside the cafe as the rain picked up. Then he pulled out his phone, not to scroll, but to call. He tapped the contact titled Alpha Crew. As the call rang, a small, serious smile formed at the edge of his lips. When the line clicked, he simply said, "Boys, we've got a situation. Meet me in town." It's time we reminded a few people what honor looks like. The next afternoon, the cafe was oddly quiet. The morning rush had passed, but something felt different, like a storm was waiting just beyond the glass. The regulars chatted in hushed tones, glancing occasionally at the door as if expecting something. At 12:03 p.m., the bell above the cafe's entrance gave a sharp ding, and the moment froze. For men stepped inside, not just any men, U.S. Marines, dressed in full uniform, boots polished, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. The chatter stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the barista behind the espresso machine turned down the steamer, watching with wide eyes. These weren't just guests. They were on a mission. The Marines moved as one, disciplined, calm, and commanding. At their front was Corporal Thomas Briggs, the same man who had quietly filmed the injustice just a day earlier. His face was set, focused, determined. They didn't sit. They didn't order. They marched directly to the counter. A few seconds later, the manager emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, confused by the sudden silence. He looked up and stopped cold when he saw them. One of the Marines, not Thomas, took a slow step forward. "We're here to speak to the owner," he said, voice low and clear. The manager stiffened. "I'm the manager. What's this about?" Thomas stepped in now, his voice calm but with steel behind it. "It's about Emily," he said. "The waitress you fired for feeding a starving veteran yesterday." A murmur rippled through the cafe. Eyes widened. Someone whispered, "Is this about that video?" The manager blinked, suddenly aware that every eye was on him. "That was a private matter. None of your business," he said with forced confidence. Thomas took a slow step forward. "Sir, that man she helped? His name is Walter Grant. He's a decorated war veteran. Purple Heart. 2 tours. That man bled for this country." He paused, then added, "And she?" She was the only one in this building who showed him respect. The manager's lip curled. "Who do you think you are? Some social media warriors? You can't just walk in here and..." Before he could finish, Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, neatly folded stack of papers. He placed it on the counter. "This is who we are," he said calmly. The manager unfolded the top page and stared. It was a printed screenshot of Emily standing over the veteran with a plate of food, smiling. Beneath it, over 3 million views, thousands of comments, and headlines from major news outlets. Another sheet showed customer reviews. Hundreds of them. 1-star ratings. Angry voices calling for boycotts. Demanding justice. Sharing Emily's story. "Your cafe," Thomas said, eyes locked on the manager, "is trending for all the wrong reasons." Outside, as if on cue, a car honked. And when the manager glanced out the window, his jaw dropped. Dozens of people had gathered. Local news crews. Veterans in uniform. Mothers with kids holding signs. Even Walter, dressed in his old jacket, stood among them with his arms folded, proud. A hand-lettered sign read, "Heroes deserve better, another." We stand with Emily, the cafe, once full of pride and routine, now stood at the center of a firestorm. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, honor, and a waitress who had the courage to do what was right. And now, Thanks to 4 Marines, the world knew. Community strikes back. The Marines didn't yell. They didn't vandalize. They didn't raise their fists or make threats. They simply stood their ground, tall, proud, and unshakably calm. Each of them carried not weapons, but presence. The kind that speaks louder than any voice. The kind that makes you remember what dignity looks like. Inside the cafe, you could hear a pin drop. But outside, that's where the real movement had begun. By now, the sidewalk was packed with people. Dozens had grown into hundreds. The word had spread like wildfire, from the viral video to local news broadcasts, to veterans groups, to everyday people moved by one act of kindness. The air buzzed with emotion. Old veterans in wheelchairs, draped in their faded service jackets, held up handmade signs. Mothers with toddlers perched on their shoulders clapped as more people joined. Teenagers, usually glued to their phones, now held up live streams and chanted Emily's name. Signs bobbed above the heads of the crowd. Stand with Emily. Kindness is not a crime. Feed a veteran. Fire yourself. We honor heroes and those who serve them. The manager stepped outside, eyes darting nervously. The proud image of control he had clung to for so long was cracking. Now he stood in the middle of a PR disaster, one that he had created. He tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by chants. Emily, Emily. And then Emily appeared, walking cautiously down the sidewalk, unsure of what she was even walking into. She had no idea her story had touched so many. At first, she looked confused, stunned by the crowd, the signs, the flashing news cameras. Then she spotted the Marines standing in a neat line near the front steps, and her eyes widened. Thomas broke formation and walked up to her, offering a simple smile, the kind that calms storms. He extended a hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. "You did what was right." And with those words, the crowd erupted. Cheers exploded from every corner. Applause echoed through the town square. Horns honked from passing cars. Even some of the cafe's regular customers stepped outside and joined the celebration. Emily's eyes welled with tears. In just 24 hours, she had gone from jobless and humiliated to a symbol of compassion, of courage, of quiet rebellion against cold-hearted rules. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked with emotion. I just wanted him to eat," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "And that's exactly why you're a hero too." The cameras zoomed in. The photos went viral. Reporters asked for interviews. Local businesses began offering Emily job opportunities on the spot, some even offering to donate meals weekly in her name to homeless veterans. The manager, realizing his mistake far too late, faded into the background. And in that moment, in the warm sunlight, among strangers turned supporters, Emily stood tall, not as a fired waitress, but as a reminder to the world that kindness still matters. In the days that followed, the cafe that once fired Emily became a ghost of itself. The once busy table sat empty. The cheerful clatter of dishes was gone. And the reviews, once glowing, were now a flood of one-star ratings and outraged comments. Shameful. Never eating here again. You fired someone for kindness? We stand with Emily. The story had caught fire, spreading beyond the town, beyond the state, until it was a national headline. Morning shows, podcasts, online news outlets, all telling the story of a young waitress, a hungry veteran, and 4 Marines who refused to stay silent. The cafe's owner eventually released a carefully worded public apology, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Emily's world changed overnight. Messages poured in, support from strangers, offers from people she'd never met, including job offers from across the country. Diners, restaurants, veteran-run nonprofits, and even food networks reached out, hoping to bring her into their family. One offer stood out. A small veteran-owned diner in Texas offered her a management role. Full pay, full respect, and a chance to build something new. But Emily had other plans. She looked around her small hometown, the streets she'd walked every day, the faces she had served for years, and realized something. She didn't need to leave to make a difference. She just needed to start something of her own. And so, With the help of Corporal Thomas Briggs, the Marines, local veterans, and a wave of community donations, Emily opened her own cafe just 4 blocks away from where she was fired. Its name? Emily's Honor Kitchen. The sign above the door was simple, hand-carved by a retired Navy carpenter who said, "It's the least I could do." Inside, the walls were decorated with old military photos, handwritten letters from veterans and their families, and one framed napkin with the words, "Kindness is never wasted." The house policy was clear: United States veterans eat free. Always. No questions asked. No need to prove anything. If you served, you were family. And as for Walter, the old veteran who started it all, he became the cafe's very first customer. The ribbon cutter on opening day, standing proudly in his cleaned-up jacket, now wearing a fresh new medal given to him by the town mayor. He didn't just eat there. He became the cafe's official greeter, smiling at guests, telling stories, and sometimes even helping clear plates. The once quiet man who had barely whispered for a glass of water was now surrounded by respect, warmth, and a sense of home. The story of Emily's firing and everything that came after continued to make headlines. It was featured on national television, shared by celebrities, taught in schools as an example of empathy and courage. Even the U.S. military publicly recognized Emily for her compassion. And yet, at the heart of it all, it came down to one small moment, one act of kindness, one unfair firing, and 4 Marines who refused to stay silent. That's all it took to remind a town, a country, and maybe the world that doing what's right doesn't always come with applause, but sometimes it can change everything.